Hello, and welcome to the podcast From There to Here, a podcast brought to life with Kintsugi heroes. I'm your host, Emma Bellamy, and each week we will dive into conversations with people who get what it takes to rebuild a home away from home. Today, my guest is Katrina James. Katrina offers a compassionate, therapy-focused perspective on the complexities of migration. She is a registered counsellor and the founder of Reframe Counselling, a mental health practice dedicated to helping migrants thrive in their new contexts. In this episode, she uncovers some of the unique challenges that immigrants face when adapting to the Australian workforce and culture. She shares great professional insights, including how migrants can reframe painful experiences and build confidence in a setting that wasn't necessarily built for them. If you want to step into a therapist's office without being on the couch, this episode is for you. Katrina James, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. What a pleasure. What a treat. Thank you for inviting me.
Katrina, can you please tell us about your approach to counseling and why it has the potential to help those who struggle with what migration involves?
Yeah, sure. There's not really one specific thing that I can say is, migrant counseling. And it's not even always so much about like the act of migration that I'm helping people with. It's often just the fact of being a migrant and doing a thing, which could be getting a job. It could be navigating a relationship. It could be losing parents, so it's all of that thing and being a migrant at the same time, which I think is something that all people always have with them. And so they're always experiencing things perhaps a little bit differently to somebody who was born in Australia and grew up with that culture.
Okay. So you've cited a few problems that some of your clients have experienced, but I wonder whether you can give us maybe an overview of all the different issues that you've encountered. Well, not all of them, but some of the most important ones, because I'm assuming it also depends on the stage of their migration journey, where they're at in the process.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, yes, there isn't one issue, but there's some common things. So if you come from a culture that is more community based or more focused on family, and then navigating a culture such as Australia, which is more individual, Australians question their boss, they make fun of their boss, like it's just a thing that we do in the culture. But if you come from a culture where like you never speak out of rank, you don't go to a manager, you would go to the, team leader first and you only ever follow that chain of command, it can be really difficult. Because then in Australia, it's like you don't really automatically get a new position. But if you go and ask and go and say, hey, why didn't I get that? I want to be doing this, then it would be taken on board. But if you've never experienced it, and not only experienced it, you've not seen your parents do it, like it's just not part of your culture, that becomes really tricky to navigate. And so issues like that is probably the most common. So it's more about how things are done because they're done differently. Doesn't make either of them better or worse way to do it. It's just a different way of doing it.
Mm. Wow. And so you help them understand an Australian point of view that they can refer to so that they can understand their new reality, their new context better.
Yes, exactly. The new context better and understanding, say for if your whole life, you're told something was very rude, if using the same example, if you were told it's very rude to question your boss, then even if you learn to do it, it can still feel really awful because you've been told your whole life that this thing is rude. And that is where I work with people as well. So I'm not really taking them through the process of how to talk to their boss. It's more looking at these underlying beliefs that stop you. Because if you hold a belief that that's rude, or if you hold a belief of, I'll never get a promotion, then you're not going to do it.
Mm.
So reprogramming or reframing those beliefs, nothing changes, just the view of it changes, which then allows you to do what you need to do in this different context.
And would you say that most of the migrants that you see experience this divide between the expectations that they have and the reality that is perhaps a bit different to the beliefs that they are having?
In general, yes, I would say yes, but I wouldn't say that every migrant experiences this issue around talking to their boss. But it could be
Mm.
a different type of issue. It could just be something like when you have okay, here's a great example. When in Australia we say like, "Are you having morning tea?" So we say, but no one actually expects you to go have a cup of tea. It's just a break, basically, right? And so I've known of people who someone said to them, "Oh, you're going to take your tea break now." And they're like, "Well, I don't like tea, so I'm fine. I don't need to have a break," right? You're like, "Fair enough, that makes sense." But by law, actually, you have to have a break because that's how it works in Australia. We just happen to call it a tea break. Do you have to drink tea? No. Do you need to take a break? Yes.
Mm. Okay. And you do work mostly with people who are active in the professional world, or do you also work with people who are retiring or are not perhaps working in Australia?
Yeah, mostly in the professional world, but I have also working with people who are navigating that change from perhaps to retirement or perhaps to a different job type. So maybe going
Mm.
from full-time employment to part-time employment, whether that's because of their age or if that's because of what is suitable for their family now. So definitely all different stages. And like I said, it might not be until you're retiring that you actually have something come up for you that's a bit difficult because you've never experienced retirement before, and you didn't see it from your parents. And you could have been in Australia for 25 years and navigated everything. But the retirement part might be quite tricky because, again, it's a new thing. You've never seen it.
Mm. As a migrant, why would it be more complicated? Is it because you are retiring and you don't have your family with you if your family is in your home country? So you are having a bit of a, what do I do with my life now?
Exactly. Yeah, that can definitely be something. It can actually, maybe some things that you've kind of ignored before. Now you're actually seeing them. So it could be things like this connection with not just family, but perhaps connection with friends, friendship groups, and people can start to get concerned like, what am I going to do with all of this time? And that friendship that I actually meant to repair, I didn't do that, and now it's coming up for me. Now I'm actually having to think about this, or I'm actually having to think about the well-being of myself and my family now that I'm retired. It's a different context. And these are things actually people don't really expect them because they've never had to deal with them before. But when we move to a different stage of life, often things come up that we've just never considered before because we were able to push them off. We could distract ourselves. We could do, something else. And so that's what it is. It's the change. It's never just kind of like, oh, well, you'll experience this. There's no guidebook of, okay, you're retiring now. This is what's going to happen. Unfortunately not. And it's the same with migration. One person's journey is completely different to somebody else's journey and experience. And they're all valid.
Actually, on that, I wonder whether you agree with the different phases of migration. I know that most researchers say that you have the honeymoon period, then you have the culture shock, the adjustment, and then adaptation. Do you see that with most of your clients, or some probably don't really fit that linear model?
Yeah, I think that word is a great word, linear. Do I see it? Yes. Does it go in that, nice line? Yeah, absolutely not. And I think sometimes that these lineal stories of you'll experience A, B, C actually stop people from getting help because they think, well, I should be past this stage already. I'm past the
Mm.
homesickness stage. Why am I feeling like this? But I can't reach out for help because how embarrassing. I should have been over that 2 years ago. It's not true. It's not true. so many different things can activate different feelings at any time for any of us. Actually, it could be the weather, it could be a neighbor cooking something that you haven't smelt for a long time, and so that smell, activates a feeling with us. There's so many different things that can just activate things, and that without us really even meaning to. So things can happen at any time. So I don't know what the picture is. It's definitely not an arrow, and it's not always a circle. It's probably more like a squiggle kind of thing, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So what I hear you say is that basically you can feel like you have adapted in the country, but something may trigger you, and then suddenly you feel like you are actually not integrated in the way you thought you were.
absolutely, absolutely.
What are the common events that usually make people feel like they don't belong anymore, or they feel out of alignment with the country they are in?
Yeah. It could be many things, it's not big things, like it could be a birthday, turning a particular age, could trigger some expectations that you didn't realize that you were holding, thinking, well, let's say I'm 40, I should know these things by now. It could be children, it could be parents, it could be so many different things, but it's often those big milestones that really can trigger a lot of things for us. And just back to that expectation of like, but I'm past this. I shouldn't be this anymore. And that can really bring up lots of things that you don't talk about. And another thing that can bring things up is talking to people back home,
Mm.
right? Because
Mm.
often people think like, oh, let me just, I'll just tell them back home, oh, I'm having a hard time or things are not great or whatever. And, of course the response varies, but it's always some version of, well, you decided to move to Australia. What are you complaining about? And
Yeah.
it gets shut down very quickly. And you weren't actually complaining. You were just venting. But that leaves you in a really hard place because you can't tell people back home that, for want of seeming like you're complaining. And also sometimes it's hard to tell colleagues or even new friends that you've made in Australia because there's a sense of like, oh, but you're so lucky to be here. And so you should not complain or you should not say anything out of turn because you're so lucky to be here. Even though that wasn't what you were doing. You were never saying, I don't want to be here. You can be very thankful to be here and also have a bad day. It's fine for those two things to exist.
Eh, Actually, it's funny because this makes me think that many people seem to fantasize sometimes about the life you have in another country. It's something that I have realized when I came back to France and I discussed with some of my friends, and the view they had of my life was a fantasy in a way.
Right.
And I think they were projecting on maybe perhaps a desire that they would have had to live abroad, and they have this idea of what it may be like. And I was trying to tell them that it was very hard at times and it had been a really difficult journey,
Yeah,
but they really see, oh, yeah, but you are in Australia. It sounds exotic. It sounds like it's an amazing thing. And it is in so many ways. But I think that there is a distortion in the way they perceive your life.
absolutely. You're absolutely correct. And I think even just the way Australia is portrayed, it's a beautiful country, but like it rains here, and the cost of living is really expensive. And, it's freezing in Sydney when it's 20 degrees and we've all got jumpers on, but no one it's like if you pick up a brochure for Europe, right? It's all the sun's always shining, even though like it's probably less likely to be shining than sunny, but we present ourselves in this great way. And all the story of migration is only a very like a small slice of the story. Go abroad, you'll have the best time of your life. It'll be amazing. And so for me, and that's why I love having conversations like this, is just discussing the complexity. Not one thing is a single story. And it's exactly the same with migration. And it's really important to be able to discuss because also your friends who are discussing that, it's almost like ranking who's got it harder or something.
Yeah.
Like, ooh, you're not trying to say that you can also have it hard too. We can both go through hard things at the same time. There's no competition here. That wasn't even your reason for telling them that. Your reason was to try and get some support.
Yeah. I guess it's also hard to be perfectly objective about the difficulties migrants may be facing in our own country. It's funny, I was discussing with an Australian friend who moved to live in Europe, and he was telling me how hard it was for him to get a job and how it seemed that in this new country, they valued who you knew more than your skills. And when he said that, he said, and it's not the case in Australia. And it made me think, oh my gosh, it's funny because I used to think the same way when I
Yeah.
was looking for a job in human rights. I was like, I don't know anyone. So it's very hard for me to get a job. But I think it tells how subjective your experience is and how it's hard to be aware of your own privilege because when you have connections, you have family, friends, you speak the language, you understand the social codes, but it's taken for granted. You're not even aware you have them. And sometimes it makes you think about the country in a way that is not true. It's just your experience of it as a migrant. And it was probably the same in France or the same in Australia. You just didn't experience it in this way because you were in a different situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Not my experience either. I didn't migrate to Australia. I was born here. And so I fully understand that I do not comprehend the people who I work with. I have not experienced what they have experienced, but I can let them have their experience. If they tell me something, I don't get upset. Like their experience is their experience. It's not for me to judge and it's not for me to figure out. It's for me to say, hey, this is causing you some pain. So it doesn't matter if I could have navigated it by myself. It's hard for you. So you need some help. Like, let's get that. And you're right, absolutely. It's like a fish in water, you just don't even know you're in it. And someone was asking me actually just about banking the other day, and I said, "Yeah, I guess like I feel like I don't know anything." But then we went on to have a conversation about it, and I thought, "Wow, look what I just know just because I grew up here and I just have that knowledge of just knowing." And so that has to apply to everything else as well. We just learn from seeing things. I've seen my parents do things. I've watched the news. I've known so many things. So it doesn't matter. Migration isn't about skills as such. It's difficult for everybody because it's a very personal, cultural thing, which is just difficult, regardless of what you have studied or the certificates that you have.
So there is something I'm curious to know about because as a migrant myself, I've connected with so many migrants over the years. And there is a question that has stayed with me. It's what makes an immigrant successful. And I use quotation mark when I say that. I've seen that some people are able to adapt and thrive in their new context, even if it's difficult, while some others, they really try very hard, but they don't seem to be able to adapt over the years. And some of them, when they can, they just give up and go home. What would you say play a role in setting these two groups apart?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and I wonder if it's actually more helpful to start with the definition. Like when you're saying
Yeah.
success, what even is that? Is that just someone who stayed here for a long time, or is that what
I
is
would
that?
say that in this context, success would be adapting, in feeling integrated, feeling like you are valued and included in the new country. So that would be my definition of what successful immigrant is. But maybe, there are so many ways to successful is such a loaded word.
Yeah, and that's why I ask because some people look at it as, having earned a certain amount of money or bought a property or had a family, like there's a lot of different marks of success. For me, the people who I've seen like successful and happy are actually walking that line between adapting with the new country, but also bringing themselves, their old country, like re-identifying who they are now in this context.
Mm.
So who they are and also paying respect to the person who they brought with them, who got them here, and then redefining, okay, let's take a second and just see where am I going now?
So it would be about integrating your old and new identity
Exactly.
into one
Exactly. And
person.
and sometimes swinging between the two. and sometimes not getting it right, sometimes not quite knowing. But the success I see is where people honor their own self and that they feel comfortable with that. And often where I see the friction, the other side of it, wanting to leave, wanting to go back, wanting to do something different, not wanting to, be part of Australia anymore, is when something's arising that they really want to fight against. So it could be this feeling of a loss of identity. It could be a feeling of like, well, am I not French anymore? Because if I, become Australian, what does this mean? And then trying to push against it. Well, I don't want to lose that. So I'm just going to stand firm in this. And then becomes quite rigid and hard to move around and hard to talk about. And so I seek success with people going a little bit more flow, kind of being okay with what happens and being okay with knowing that this is the decision that they've made now and they'll always be who they are.
But it's tough.
Letting yourself be okay with it being tough. It is tough.
But I was thinking as well, in the context of some people who are highly skilled in their countries, they feel like they've had, yeah, this identity. As example, they were a doctor or they were an engineer and they come here and they wash dishes and they have to have multiple jobs and no one gives them a chance. And it's really hard to think of who you are when you don't have all of these things that have identified you for so many years in your community.
And that I think that is, you asked me, not yet, but I know you've asked me before, like, what do I struggle with or what have I found difficult? And this is the stuff that I actually find, it's not that I find it hard. I just find it like disheartening because it is like that. Yeah, that can happen, and I wouldn't wanna just be like, "Oh, we'll just smile and, like, everything will be fine," or just think about it a different way, because that's not doing any service to someone's experience. That absolutely does happen, and the problem is not on the person, it's on the system. It really is on the system. Australia likes to say that we want everyone to come here, but the visa process, we won't go down that path, but that's not great as it is. But then even once you get here, then that's like there's just nothing. There isn't support. There isn't somebody saying, "Hey, are you feeling like this? Maybe you should go have a chat with somebody, or let's see how we can help you here." Because it's easy for someone to say have a chat with your boss, but if they're the ones that are putting you on the crappy shifts, like they're not all of a sudden going to have the compassion to help you out.
They may take advantage of you as well when you are a migrant. I know that my first job when I arrived in Australia, I did not speak any English. And I worked in a cafe for a week or two, and the guy refused to pay me. And he was doing that, like it was a turnover of young women who didn't speak English very well. And that was a thing. And that was my first lesson. Okay, like ask your money up front,
Yeah, that's awful. Like, what a lesson to be learning. I don't know how, like, oh, there's so many other lessons that we could be helping people to
Yeah,
learn,
true.
because then you take that experience and then that hardens you a little bit. And I don't know if that's been your experience, Em, but that's what happens. People have not just one, but multiple experiences, and each one hardens you a little bit. And that's where you do get to the point where you're going, I'm going home or I'm going to a different country because I'm sick of being treated like this. Just like all migrants don't represent their countries that they're from. These awful experiences also don't represent all of Australia. But if that's the only experience you have, then that's what you're going to go from. It just feels like migrants is just an easy group to pick on. It's awful. And for me personally, I think if the country's going to say how welcoming they are of migrants, then it can't just be a welcome to come to the country and we take your money. It has to go through the whole life cycle. So things like that, things like accommodation, like there really needs to be so many supports put in place. And not even that, like when you're telling me about the cafe, like just other people who talk up. Or where do you even get that education to say, what can you do?
Yeah, and I know what to do, but at the time, I just didn't want any trouble. And I think that there is this position when you are a migrant is that I don't want my visa. to yeah, you feel threatened in so many ways that you do not want to have the fight.
Absolutely. There's a huge power imbalance there, right? Because you're just always thinking, what about my visa? And that for me, that makes this a particular group of people vulnerable because they don't have the same access to information or ability as someone who was born here. That's it. Simple. So of course there should be this information provided.
There is something else that I am interested to know in the context of reframing the way migrants think about their reality, because I was wondering, how do you distinguish a belief that negatively distorts someone's perception of reality, which you can reframe, from a reality driven belief or fear that is perfectly valid to have, which I assume you don't really want to reframe?
This is really interesting. Okay, so we're looking at like one belief that's driven from thought, and then I have my own view of it. And then the other one is actually from there's some evidence to say, like, this is actually pretty bad.
Like racism or discrimination.
Exactly. No, totally. I don't want to reframe that to be like, oh, well, it's not a big deal, which is what we've been doing in any white country for a really long time, right? Like, oh, it's not a big deal. You should be right. I don't want to reframe that. But however, what I want to reframe is people's experience of it and how you operate from that belief. So they kind of both become similar in that way because everything is about how we end up operating as humans, right? And how we move forward. And so it's perfectly acceptable. And I think this a big thing is that we've a lot of us, a majority of us, and I know I've experienced this myself, is just being cut off from our own beliefs or just not believing our own self. Right. So if you have an experience that you perceive as racism, you experience it as racism, then that's what it is. I'm not here to convince you that it was something else or it wasn't as bad or that it was only a microaggression or, like give it some easier language. No, it's absolutely what you experienced. And it's about using that as fuel to take action.
Mm. Give me an example.
Yeah. So if it was, say, at the workplace and you experience this, so there's two actions that you can do. Well, one is the inaction, where you kind of just make yourself feel like, oh, it's not that bad, or she's actually a really nice person, or she's never done this before. All the stuff we start to do to justify things. Or perhaps you use it to go and become part of a different team or to leave that job. And I know that, all of that is not also reality either. Because if you need a job, perhaps you're not going to complain about things. And so it's very, very difficult. And I think that's where some think like a professional like me or other counselors or a psychologist, many other people in the caring industry can help you to get through that period of time because nothing ever keeps happening forever. Everything always goes through cycles. And so I think sometimes when it's very, very difficult is when you actually do need somebody else just to hold you to help you get through that time and to figure out what you actually want to do and what's going to work for you and your family. And if it becomes that you want to stay and you're going to stay there, perhaps you focus to the money instead. So you're no longer about focusing on this great company and lovely company. Your focus literally becomes, I do this job because it pays me and I'm going to do it until I find something else. You create a plan that says, okay, I don't want to take action now, but let's see what's going to, 12 months, how much time do I need to get into something else?
Mm.
So that moves you forward. You don't always have to be challenging things because that's damn exhausting and it's not always your responsibility, but you can be using it to help you move into where you want to be.
Basically, you are trying not to reframe the discriminatory experience. As example, in the context of a job, if you have a client who arrive and say, "Look, I cannot get a job because I have a very thick foreign accent, and every time I have an interview, they seem to be disturbed, and they don't give me a chance." I guess you cannot reframe the reality of it being more difficult when you have an accent. But at the same time, perhaps you can say to them that it doesn't say anything about their ability to find a job as a non native speaker. It doesn't tell you how capable and intelligent you are.
Absolutely, exactly. So the situation doesn't have to change, but perhaps your view of it does. So if you have an accent, you have an accent. It's not going to change tomorrow, right? But
Yeah.
the way that you view it, if you think that that's the reason why you're not getting through job interviews, then that's how you're always going to operate in job interviews. Is you're in the back of your mind, you're just thinking, "Oh God, I hope they understand me." Oh, blah blah, and you're actually preparing for the accent rather than preparing for the job.
Yeah. How do you make someone confident about that? Confident in the sense, I own my accent and it's okay. How do you kind of change the way people feel about their identity?
Mm. It's a big piece and it can take time and experience. So part of my job also is having positive experiences with people. I often have people tell me like, "Oh, no one understands me. I don't know anything," or, "I can't hold a conversation," after we've had a 45-minute conversation. So even just acknowledging that alone to say, "Well, actually, I didn't ask you to repeat yourself, and it seems like I know what's happening. I've been able to understand you." Just that experience alone can really help people to be like, "Oh, yeah, like maybe there's a little chance that my story isn't 100% true. Let's look for the parts where actually it's not proof." You know, if we think of times of, maybe I don't like my appearance. Okay, has there ever been a time where you've looked in the mirror and you've said, "Hey, look pretty good today," right? And then we take that and we try and make them bigger. We try and repeat that experience over and over. "What do you like?" "Oh, you like your knees." "Great. Okay, what is it about that you like them? Can we move that up to your thighs?" It's the expansion of these small things,
And shifting your focus.
shifting your focus again. And also, you don't have to go like from today, you're not going to go from "I hate myself" to "I love myself" in a 1 hour session with me. And maybe you never get to "I love myself," but maybe you get to "I accept myself."
I accept myself. Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's such a journey to get to acceptance, to self acceptance fully. I think for every one of us. I wonder whether you have a piece of advice or a word of wisdom that tends to have impact on your clients that you could, share with us today.
Yeah, sure. Something I'd love to share with clients is something that they're not quite aware of is if you actually look into the migration policy, which is a very dense document, so I would understand if nobody else has done that. It actually lists some statistics about how much migrants bring into Australia. And I don't know have the exact stats here, but it's about 3 times more than a native person, so somebody who was born here. And for me, that's what I share with people to say, "Do you know how much you're worth?" Like, the government actually outlines it. They put it down on paper. You're actually worth so much to this country. And so start operating like that.
Mm.
Australia has a way of making people feel like, they're so lucky to be here. Australia's in a negative birth rate. If migrants don't come, like the population doesn't grow. That's how valuable somebody who migrates here is. Like, to me, that flips the script.
Can you recommend a book or a movie or a show or something that, changed the way you think and feel about migration?
So I used to work as a photographer.
Oh,
Yeah. I actually think that has been the biggest thing because I've literally just learnt to watch the world. Photography is like actually it's a really amazing exercise in mindfulness.
tell me more.
You have to be there. You have to be ready for the shot. You have to be observing what's going on, whether it's in frame or out of frame. You really heighten that sense of knowing what's happening. And I have just got into I don't do photography anymore, but I would do lots of different events. And so I have been to places I would never ever get into. But because of the photography part, like say for example, I've been to the New Zealand ambassador's house for dinner, which I would never do. And it was only because I didn't really go there. I was there as the photographer, right? And so being able to speak to different people or just see a different way of doing things, I really think that has been the biggest influence of things. And often I would turn up to events that had more photographers than guests. And so you would have to find a different perspective quite quickly. And that has been a huge help to me, which I really didn't realize that that's what I was practicing. I was really practicing finding a different perspective, because there could be 10 photographers, 10 different photos. All those photos are true, but they could all be completely different as well.
Mm. No, it's interesting that also the name of your practice is reframing.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a nod.
So now we are coming to an end, and I have two slightly weird questions to ask. So the first one is, what does the word migrant evoke to you?
The word that's coming to mind, and I'll just go with that because I guess that's what's happening, is different.
Mm.
And I think maybe that could be part of the problem. For me, it just comes up as this like foreign alien, you know? It's interesting. I actually lived in Germany for a little while. And when you go to it's called the Ausländerbehörde, which actually means aliens office.
Oh, wow. So I don't know what it tells about the way they see foreigners. It's a bit freaky.
Yeah, government speak is very mismatched to people's experiences.
But I guess difference is something that we all experience. So I think that difference shouldn't be something that we see as being part of a problem. It should be something we consider as a starting point for more rich interactions.
Absolutely. And again, to reference the photography, but actually in photography, you need contrast. Without contrast, you can't focus. So you need to have black and white and shades of it. Otherwise, there's nothing for the camera to focus on. If everything's one shade, it just can't find focus. And so there's something quite beautiful there in that to have a proper picture, you need contrast.
I love that. I love that. It's such a good metaphor. It's actually slightly poetic.
Something beautiful, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really is. And the second weird question is, what does being Australian mean to you?
I knew you were going to ask me this, so I've been thinking about it all day and I can't think of an answer. Honestly, I just don't even know. And maybe it's because, like what we were talking about earlier, is because I just have always experienced it. So I don't know.
Mm.
But there's nothing that makes me feel Australian other than having been born here and living here. Of course, I'm Australian. Is there something that I'm like, this is Australian? This is, but
I struggle with that too. And that's why I asked the question, because I wonder, most migrants, they arrive here and they go through a process, I guess, of adaptation. But some of them consider themselves Australian once they acquire the citizenship.
mm,
Some others never become citizen, but they think of themselves as Australian. So I really wonder, when you acquire the Australianness, it's hard.
it's really hard. It's really hard. I've really thought of this. And I have also asked other friends as well, like at what point do you feel Australian? And I haven't been able to get a clear answer on that.
I think it's something we should spend more time thinking about, particularly in a conversation where you're like, oh, you're not Australian. What does it mean to be actually Australian? Tell me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the politicians or the country itself doesn't really actually have a very clear identity. So that also makes it difficult.
Yeah, I guess that we could keep thinking about those questions forever, because I guess they are philosophical in nature.
Yeah.
There isn't a straight answer, and everyone's answers are going to be different. I wonder, for those who are interested in the work that you do, where can they find you? Where can they get in contact with you?
Yeah, they can look up my website, reframecounselling.com.au. On LinkedIn, Katrina James. They're probably the two best places to look for me.
Well, Katrina, thank you so much for sharing your insights, the work that you do with me and our audience. It was such a pleasure to interview you. And yeah, I really hope that this episode is going to make migrants who listen to us understand that they don't have to do this alone, that there are people like you who really care and who, know the kind of problems that they are going through and who can support them through their journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there has to be more to life than just a nice country to live in. We want more than that.
Yeah, I'm sure that you can help them have that. Well, Katrina, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And that's a wrap for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the show. I hope you enjoyed my very first conversation with Katrina. If you did, please like, follow, and rate the podcast. That would make a massive, massive difference to the production of the show. Next week, I will be interviewing Steve Coe, an immigrant who left his birthland as a child due to risks of persecution. I was your host, Emma Bellamy, and I cannot wait to bring you on another journey from there to here.